This story is set in September 2012 in Scotland. It focuses on a professional diver named Chris Lemons, a member of an underwater gas pipeline maintenance team called the Saturation Diving Team. That day, Chris was visiting his fiancée, Morag. In a warm but emotional atmosphere, he told her that he would be returning to work at sea the next day with his colleagues. Chris reassured Morag not to worry and assured her that everything would be fine.
It's a good thing you're
The next morning, Chris headed to the harbor. The large ship where he worked was waiting there. As he boarded the ship, Chris was warmly greeted by his colleagues, especially Duncan Alcock, his best friend, and a man he considered like a father.
Taking 2 bottles of hot sauce. Hey, Stu.
Soon after, their boss, Craig, gathered the whole team for a briefing. Craig explained that they would be entering a hyperbaric chamber for 28 days. After the pressure adjustment process was complete, they would be lowered to a depth of 300 feet below sea level to replace a damaged gas pipe. Craig then divided them into 3 teams, each with 3 members. Team A consisted of Chris, Duncan, and Dave.
C, Team A. Doors closed. Gas flow interrupted.
After the division was done, all the divers entered their respective chambers to begin the pre-dive pressurization process.
Then he did it. As an old man, I find I'm
The door closes.
grizzly when he's here. So are we good to look? Team A standing by.
The ship then began to leave the harbor, sailing towards the Aberdeen Sea in northeastern Scotland. During the journey, Duncan mentioned that this would be his last job before retirement. He wasn't young anymore and felt it was time to rest. Chris was surprised and a little disappointed because he had just found out. But Duncan smiled and said that Chris was already skilled enough to continue this work without him. Those words felt like a sincere farewell message.
Oh yeah, that does
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I can't believe.
Why do you...
No. You don't leave me around.
A few days later, their ship finally arrived at the destination. That night, the first team to go down was Team A, Chris's team.
What about you two? All right, see you guys up top.
You good? Yeah.
Once the equipment was ready, they began to lower themselves to the 300-foot depth.
Left surface at 20.
Duncan's job was to monitor from inside the ship, controlling communication and airflow through the umbilical line, a large hose supplying oxygen, power, and voice comms. Meanwhile, Dave and Chris were on the seabed, working in the darkness and high pressure. That night, they were scheduled to work for a full 6 hours without surfacing. The atmosphere on the seabed was silent and cold, with only the sound of breathing in their helmets audible. For Chris, this wasn't just a risky job, but also proof of his determination, living with danger for the future he was building with Morag. Upon reaching the seabed, Chris and Dave quickly moved towards the manifold, a large steel structure where they would work on repairing the gas pipeline. As soon as they switched on the power, a dim light began to illuminate the area. The dark seawater became a little brighter, revealing the huge shadows of the metal pipes around them. Without wasting any time, both of them entered the manifold area and started working according to procedure.
Well, I've got... All right.
But just a few minutes in, the Dynamic Positioning System, DPS, which functions to keep the ship stable above them, malfunctioned. As a result, the ship slowly started drifting away from the work site. Seeing the ship start to move, Dave immediately realized the danger. He shouted over the radio for Chris to climb on top of the manifold and get back to the bell, the small capsule-shaped chamber connected to the ship where Duncan was stationed. Dave managed to get up first, but Chris was having trouble. His umbilical hose was snagged underneath the steel structure. While the ship kept moving away, the umbilical line got tighter, pulling Chris's body and making it hard for him to move.
Spinning us around. That's why. Look.
In a panic, Chris struggled to free himself. Finally, the line snapped, but at the same moment, Chris was dragged along and fell into the dark seabed. Before losing contact, Dave managed to tell him over the radio that if he survived, he should try to get back on top of the manifold. That would make it easier for Dave to find him later. On the ship, Duncan, monitoring from the control room, felt incredibly anxious when he saw one of Chris's umbilical lines snap. Soon after, Dave surfaced via the bell and delivered the bad news. Chris had fallen to the seabed because his umbilical got snagged. Hearing this, Duncan fell silent. His face was grim, his heart shattered to hear that his best friend, whom he considered like his own son, was now trapped in the deep sea without oxygen and communication. Meanwhile, their boss, Craig, rushed to the bridge and asked the ship's captain to immediately drop anchor to stop the ship from moving. But the captain refused. Their location was too risky. There were many active gas pipelines under the ship. If the anchor hit one of the pipes, it could cause a massive explosion and pollute the entire surrounding sea. Chris was now completely trapped. With his umbilical severed, he lost his main oxygen supply, the power for his suit's heater, and his voice comms with the team above. He only had the leftover air in his backup tank, which wouldn't last long. In the control room, the situation grew more tense. The captain and his first mate, Hannah, decided to operate the ship's thrusters manually to prevent them from drifting further away from where Chris was trapped.
Can't do this without you. Well, take control.
Thrusters in.
Meanwhile, in the silent, cold depths of the sea, Chris tried to stay calm. Using his remaining strength, he crawled through the sea mud and the shadows of the metal pipes until he finally found the manifold structure again. He tried to climb on top of it as Dave had instructed, so he'd be easier to find. But before he could call out to anyone, he started to feel short of breath. On the verge of losing consciousness, Chris remembered a video message from his fiancée, Morag. In the video, she was crying, saying how worried she was about his dangerous job. She was afraid of losing the person she loved, but Chris had chosen to stay in this job because he wanted to save money for their wedding and their future.
Oh, I'm saying. Come home.
Meanwhile, on the ship, a crew member named Jack took a big risk. He tried to forcibly repair the DPS by replacing the main cable so the thruster system could function automatically again. He had only one hope, that the ship could return to its original position and the team could find Chris before it was too late. At the same time, on the ship, a crew member named Max tried to locate Chris using an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle, an underwater robot controlled from a distance. Everyone in the control room held their breath, staring at the monitor screen showing the dark view of the seabed. Soon after, the ROV's camera managed to capture Chris's figure lying on top of the manifold. The moment he saw it, their boss, Craig, let out a sigh of relief. At least Chris was still in a reachable place. But the footage showed Chris's body convulsing, a sign that his brain was being deprived of oxygen. Craig immediately asked Max to try and lift Chris using the ROV.
No sign of brief spasms, sir. It's rated to pick up.
But Max refused. The risk of pulling a diver's body with that machine was too great. The slightest mistake could damage the pressure suit or even sever any remaining air connections around the site. However, feeling responsible for all the divers under his command, Craig finally took over the controls. He tried to direct the ROV himself to pull Chris's body. After several attempts, the machine managed to reach Chris's body, but it couldn't lift him. It turned out Chris had instinctively tied himself to the manifold structure before losing consciousness, so he wouldn't be swept away by the ocean current. Meanwhile, inside the pressure chamber, Duncan tried to calm himself down by talking to Dave. He recalled a year ago, when he and Chris had participated in a mission to rescue a sunken ship. Out of all the experienced divers, only the two of them had managed to endure the long dive and eventually found the ship together with the victims.
Turns, we were down there.
That memory made Duncan even more certain. If anyone could survive on the seabed, no matter how bad the situation, it was Chris. On another front, Jack worked hard to fix the broken DPS. He replaced the main cable and manually reset the system. After several tense attempts, the DPS finally came back online and the ship's thrusters could function automatically again.
Yes, Cap. Chris.
Once the ship was stable again, they immediately headed to the location where Chris was last seen. As soon as they arrived, Dave immediately went into the sea to rescue Chris.
Gas is good.
That's diver one.
Sight.
When he reached the top of the manifold, Dave found Chris still tied there. With his limited remaining strength and breath, Dave worked to untie the rope binding Chris's body and pulled him towards the Bell capsule. The rescue process was extremely difficult. Chris's body was limp, and the ocean current kept shaking them. But thanks to the instructions and constant encouragement Duncan gave over the voice comms, Dave finally managed to get Chris to the surface.
Go with the swell.
Duncan?
Going up. You can do this, buddy.
Once Chris was inside the Bell, Duncan immediately checked on him and tried to revive him.
You're in the... You're all right.
After a few tense minutes, Chris finally took a breath again. Everyone on the ship was relieved. Duncan smiled, his eyes welling up. He knew full well that under those conditions, Chris shouldn't have been alive. But the relief wasn't complete. When they tried to talk to Chris, there was no response. He just stared blankly, with no reaction. They were afraid Chris had suffered permanent brain damage from a lack of oxygen for nearly 40 minutes. A silent atmosphere filled the room. But suddenly, amidst the sadness, Chris spoke softly. Instantly, the whole room's mood shifted. Duncan, Dave, and all the crew witnessing that moment cried with relief. All the effort and tension over the hours hadn't been in vain. They had successfully saved Chris's life. After the incident, they decided to return to land first, postponing the work until Chris fully recovered. Unexpectedly, Chris's recovery process was quick. Dave was surprised to see his condition. When they talked again, Chris explained that ever since Duncan had successfully revived him, he had actually been conscious and could hear everything they were saying. He just chose to stay quiet because he was in shock. The fears that his fiancée Morag had always expressed had turned out to be true. He had almost lost his life at sea. However, even though the trauma was still there, Chris knew he couldn't leave his job yet. He needed the money for his future and his marriage to Morag. In a soft voice, he thanked Dave for saving his life. Hearing that, Dave fell silent. The emotion turned to sadness as he remembered his two daughters at home, and for a moment, Dave realized how thin the line between life and death was in the job they did every day. On the journey back, Chris finally called Morag. His voice sounded weak but relieved. He told her that their ship had had a serious problem, so their work had to be postponed. He said he would be home soon, and Morag could only listen in silence, holding back a mix of gratitude and anxiety.
That was your best. I love you.
Few days later, the ship Chris worked on finally arrived at the harbor.
After all this, you're still gonna miss it.
Duncan.
The moment he stepped on land, Chris hurried to meet Morag. As soon as they met, Morag hugged him tightly without saying a word. That hug seemed to release all the tension and fear Chris had been holding for days. During their meeting, Chris began to tell her what really happened on the seabed, how he lost his oxygen supply, got trapped in the darkness, and almost lost his life. He told the story calmly, although his voice occasionally trembled when recalling those tense moments. Hearing the story, Morag couldn't hold back her tears. She begged Chris to quit that high-risk job. She didn't want to be haunted by the fear that her fiancé wouldn't return every time he went to work, but Chris just gave a small smile. He tried to calm Morag by saying that everything would be okay. "I'm still alive, and that's proof enough that I can get through anything," he said in a soft tone. Even though in his heart, he knew that experience would leave a permanent mark. 3 weeks after the accident, Chris, Duncan, and Dave returned to the sea. They still had to finish the work that was postponed back then. No one spoke much during the trip, but from the looks they exchanged, they knew everyone was still thinking about that terrifying incident. After the work was completed, Chris was finally able to keep his promise. He married Morag in a simple but warm ceremony. Everyone who knew their story was moved, because Chris's story wasn't just about the courage of a diver, but also about love, perseverance, and luck that almost defied belief. And here they are, the real Chris Lemons and Morag, two people whose true story proves that love and hope can endure even at a depth of 300 feet beneath the sea.